In 1983, Warner Brothers needed the ugliest car ever put on film. So they took 5 perfectly functional Ford station wagons, ripped them apart, and Frankensteined them into something that looked like a station wagon had a fever dream about being a limousine. They called it the Wagon Queen Family Truckster. It wasn't real. It was never supposed to be real. But 40 years later, people are paying over $100,000 for replicas of a car that was designed to be hated. The story of the family truckster starts, weirdly enough, with a blizzard. It's 1979, Chicago. John Hughes is 30 years old, working as a copywriter at Leo Burnett, one of the biggest advertising agencies in the country. He writes ads for a living. He's good at it. But what he really wants to do is write for National Lampoon magazine, which at that point is still riding the cultural wave of Animal House. The blizzard hits. Hughes is snowed in at home, can't get to work, can't go anywhere. So he does what writers do when they're trapped and restless. He writes, and what comes out is a short story called Vacation 58, a fictionalized account of his own childhood family road trip to Disneyland, told through the eyes of the youngest son. The opening line sets the tone for everything that would follow. If Dad hadn't shot Walt Disney in the leg, it would have been our best vacation ever. Hughes submitted it to National Lampoon, where he'd been freelancing. The story got bumped from the vacation-themed issue it was originally written for, but it eventually ran in the September 1979 edition. It was semi-autobiographical. Hughes had taken a genuinely disastrous family trip as a kid, crammed into a station wagon with relatives who didn't get along, driving across states that all looked the same, watching his father slowly lose his mind behind the wheel. The wounds were clearly still fresh 20 years later. The story landed. Readers loved it. And it caught the attention of Matty Simmons, the publisher at National Lampoon, who was still riding the commercial high of Animal House from 1978 and desperately wanted another hit. This is what we do here every week. We find the real stories behind the machines, the engineering, the culture. If you're not subscribed yet, this would be a good moment. All right, back to it. Simmons took the story to Hollywood. First stop was Paramount, where a young executive named Jeff Katzenberg read it and passed. His reasoning was that it was too episodic, too consequential. Simmons pointed out that it was a road trip movie. Road trips are episodic by definition. That's the entire structure. You go from town to town, place to place. Things happen along the way. Katzenberg didn't care. He said it would never work as a feature. So Simmons moved on to Warner Brothers, where most executives said the same thing. But one guy, a development executive named Mark Canton, actually fought for it internally. Canton pushed and pushed until the studio said yes. Sometimes the difference between a movie that gets made and a script that sits in a drawer forever is one person who won't shut up about it. Now they needed a director. They got Harold Ramis. Ramis was an alumnus of Second City Television. He'd co-written Animal House, and he'd just directed Caddyshack. He understood comedy. More importantly, he understood how to make a fundamentally absurd premise feel grounded enough that audiences could care about the people in it. And for the lead, they got Chevy Chase. Chase had left Saturday Night Live back in '76, the first cast member to do so, and had been looking for the right vehicle to establish himself as a film star. He'd had moderate success with movies like Foul Play and Seems Like Old Times, but nothing had clicked the way SNL had. This would be different. Hughes wrote the screenplay, but there was a structural problem. The original story was told from the kid's perspective. Ramis and Chase rewrote it to center on the father. A Clark Wilhelm Griswold, the eternal suburban optimist, the dad who was absolutely certain that if he just planned hard enough, tried hard enough, maintained enough enthusiasm, the family vacation would be perfect. Everyone around him knew better. Chase was born to play this man. The film would follow the Griswolds from their home near Chicago to a fictional amusement park called Wally World in Southern California. a cross-country drive in a station wagon, a family trapped together in a car for thousands of miles, and for that, they needed the right car. Well, the wrong car. That was the entire joke. In the script, Clark orders an Antarctic Blue Super Sports Wagon with a CB radio and the optional Rally Fun Pack. None of that existed. Ford never made a Super Sports Wagon. There was no Rally Fun Pack. But it sounded exactly like the kind of thing a guy like Clark Griswold would convince himself he absolutely needed. When he shows up at the dealership, a magnificently sleazy salesman played by Eugene Levy tells him the car he ordered isn't ready. 6-week wait. And by the way, his trade-in has already been crushed into a cube of scrap metal out back. The dealership is called Lou Glutz Motors, so Clark is stuck. He has to take what's on the lot. And what's on the lot is the Wagon Queen Family Truckster, finished in a color called Metallic P. Now here's where it gets interesting from a construction standpoint, because somebody had to actually build this thing, 5 of them in fact, and who that somebody was depends entirely on who you ask. For decades, the credit went to George Barris. If you know anything about Hollywood cars, you know that name. Barris was the king of custom cars. He built the 1966 Batmobile from a Lincoln Futura concept car in 3 weeks. He built the Munster Coach. He built the Beverly Hillbillies truck. He modified stunt cars for Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. His shop, Barris Custom Industries, sat on Riverside Drive in North Hollywood, strategically positioned between Universal Studios and Warner Brothers. Elvis Presley came to Barris for a custom Cadillac limousine. Elton John had him build a custom golf cart with giant star-shaped sunglasses for a windshield. The man was a legend, and he was a genius at one thing beyond the cars themselves: marketing. George Barris never met a credit he wouldn't accept. The problem is there's solid evidence that Barris didn't actually build the trucksters. A well-known replica builder named Gary Schneider did extensive research before constructing his own version and concluded that the cars were modified by Warner Brothers' in-house transportation department, not Barris, not his shop, not his crew. The theory, which has gained traction over the years, is that Barris's name got attached to the project the way it got attached to a lot of projects in Hollywood. He was the famous car guy. If a weird custom car showed up in a movie and nobody could identify the builder, people assumed Barris made it, and Barris, to his credit and his benefit, never went out of his way to correct anyone. Even Wikipedia still credits him. The debate will probably never be fully settled. Here's what makes the Barris question interesting, beyond just trivia. George and his brother Sam basically invented the California custom car scene in the late 1940s. They started as teenagers in Roseville, California, chopping and channeling Fords and Mercurys. Their father was a Greek immigrant who sent them to live with relatives when they were kids. By the time George was 18, he was already selling modified cars. Their most famous pre-Hollywood creation, the Hirohata Merc, showed up at the 1952 General Motors Motorama and overshadowed GM's own designs. The Barris brothers taught Detroit that customers wanted style, not just transportation. Then Sam died in '67, and George went full Hollywood. He was brilliant at it. He knew how to promote himself, how to attach his name to projects, on how to make sure the press called him whenever a weird car showed up on a soundstage. Was that genius or just good positioning? Depends on who you ask. Barris died in November of 2015, just short of his 90th birthday. His daughter Joji took over the business. The North Hollywood building, 18,000 square feet on Riverside Drive, eventually went up for sale at just under $4 million. 60 years of custom car history on an 18,000 square foot corner lot. The building where the Batmobile was born is most likely something entirely unremarkable now. But whoever built the trucksters, they started with 5 1979 Ford LTD Country Squire station wagons. The choice of base vehicle matters more than you might think. The Country Squire was Ford's top-of-the-line wagon. It had been in continuous production since 1950, which means it had been carrying American families around for nearly 30 years by the time someone at Warner Brothers decided to ruin 5 of them. For most of those 3 decades, the Country Squire was the default vehicle of suburban America. You bought one when you had kids, a Labrador Retriever, a lawn that needed mowing, and a 2-car garage that was mostly full of stuff that wasn't cars. The Mercury Colony Park was its slightly fancier corporate sibling, same body with a different grille and a higher sticker price. But the Country Squire was the one everybody knew. Ford had just downsized the entire full-size lineup for $79. This was a big deal. The previous year's Country Squire was a land yacht. The new one was 11 inches shorter and roughly 1,000 pounds lighter. That downsizing was a direct response to the fuel crises of the 70s, when the price of gasoline made people reconsider whether they really needed a car the size of a small boat to get to the grocery store. Ford kept the body-on-frame construction, the rear-wheel drive, and the V8 engine. They just made everything a bit smaller. The Motor Trend review at the time praised the car for having only minimal squeaks and rattles, which tells you a lot about the standards of American car manufacturing in 1979. Consumer Guide gave it their top pick for full-size wagons anyway. Under the hood sat a 302 cubic inch V8, the Windsor small block. On paper, that sounds like a real engine. In practice, it made about 130 horsepower. Emissions regulations had absolutely gutted American engines by the late 70s. Smog pumps, exhaust gas recirculation valves, restrictive catalytic converters, choke-down carburetors. They took 302 cubic inches of displacement and produced power that a modern 4-cylinder Honda Civic would beat without trying. The car weighed about 3,700 pounds. It had a 3-speed automatic. 0 to 60 was not a number anyone bragged about. If the number existed, it started with a 1 and had a second digit you'd rather not discuss. But the car was enormous inside. It would seat 8 people using the rear-facing third-row seat in the cargo area, which kids loved because you could make eye contact with the driver behind you and wave until your parents told you to stop. Ford called the unique tailgate the magic door gate. It could swing open sideways like a door or fold down flat like a truck bed. It was clever engineering that nobody appreciated at the time. Ford also offered an optional CB radio built right into the AM/FM cassette stereo. It even came with its own dedicated antenna. That's the kind of feature that made Clark Griswold's Antarctic Blue Dream Wagon with the CB and optional Rally Fun Pack feel almost plausible. Almost. This was the canvas, and the Warner Brothers crew proceeded to make it worse in every conceivable direction. First, the color. They painted all 5 cars in something called metallic P. Ford never offered this color on anything. Ever. It was a custom mix designed to look like the contents of a can of split pea soup that had been left in the sun too long. A sickly greenish yellow with enough metallic flake to catch the light and make you wish it hadn't. It shifted depending on the angle, but never toward anything you'd call attractive. Then the headlights. The stock Country Squire had 4 headlights, standard for the era. The crew took headlight and signal assemblies from another Ford, flipped them upside down, and mounted them above the originals. 8 headlights total, 4 parking lamps, 4 turn signal indicators, all functional. The front end of this car looked like a spider staring at you from across a parking lot. They removed the factory grille entirely and fabricated a new front fascia that covered most of the opening. Where the grille used to be, there were now just 2 tiny oval air openings near the bumper. The 302 V8 still needed cooling air, obviously, but the designers apparently felt that engine longevity was a secondary concern to making the car look like it had a mouth that was actively trying not to speak. They topped it off with a Wagon Queen crown hood ornament because the car needed a brand identity for a brand that didn't exist. the wood paneling. This is where it gets properly unhinged. The Country Squire already came with faux wood trim on the sides, vinyl applique, a sticker designed to evoke a material that hadn't been structurally relevant to an automobile since the late 1940s. The truckster crew took this concept and went completely sideways with it. They extended the fake wood across roughly 70% of the car's exterior. It covered the sides, it covered the hood. There was wood paneling on sections of the car where wood paneling served no conceivable aesthetic purpose. The effect was less luxury automobile and more someone tried to wallpaper a house and accidentally did a car instead. At the rear, they added a second set of taillights, giving the back 4 red lenses to match the 8 up front. Only the original pair actually worked. The extras were purely cosmetic. Faux cooling vents appeared above the rear wheel wells, air intakes on a family station wagon, like a Lamborghini Countach that had given up on its dreams and moved to the suburbs. A crown logo sat on the oversized C-pillar. A center-mounted rear door handle appeared for no reason anyone has ever explained. 2 details stand out above everything else. The fuel filler cap was relocated from the rear quarter panel to the hood. You had to open a door on the hood to fill the gas tank, over a hot engine. In the film, this produces one of the best sight gags when Clark pulls into a gas station and spends a full minute searching for where the fuel goes. During filming, Chase yanked the license plate off the back of the car in frustration, and it accidentally flew out of his hands, nearly hitting an actress standing behind the adjacent car. His look of startled concern made it into the final cut. It wasn't acting. And then there's the airbag. In the early 80s, airbags were still a novelty. The truckster had one. It was made from a trash bag, an actual garbage bag, rigged to inflate on cue. The crew could reset it between takes with a fresh bag. Cheap, ridiculous, effective. Inside, changes were minimal. Ford logos removed, headrests taken off for camera angles, seats reupholstered. Power came from the stock 130 horsepower 302 paired with a Ford AOD 4-speed automatic. Plenty. 5 identical abominations. They needed that many because the script called for the truckster to survive vandalism, a desert jump, dishonest mechanics, a dead dog, and a deceased aunt strapped to the roof rack. Each car reflected a different stage of destruction. 2 of them appear simultaneously in the dealership scene at Luglutz Motors. Production started July 5, 1982. The cast and crew, roughly 100 people strong, loaded into 24 trucks and essentially took their own road trip across 5 states over 55 days. More than 90 locations: Alamosa, Colorado, Durango, Boone, Monument Valley, Utah, Flagstaff and Sedona in Arizona, the Grand Canyon, St. Louis, Missouri, and finally California, where Wally World's exterior was actually the Santa Anita racetrack in Arcadia, and the ride scenes were filmed at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia. They came in nearly 3 days ahead of schedule, which for a comedy road picture in the early 80s was borderline miraculous. Before filming started, Ramos watched the 1981 caveman film Quest for Fire to study how director Jean-Jacques Annaud used telephoto lenses for sweeping landscape shots. He wanted that same visual language for Clark's desperate solo trek through the desert. It paid off. The desert sequences in a pea-green station wagon comedy looked genuinely cinematic. The supporting cast brought in people who would go on to much bigger careers. Beverly D'Angelo played Ellen Griswold with an understated warmth that grounded Chase's manic energy. She was a trained singer who'd starred in the 1979 film Hair. Anthony Michael Hall, 14 years old, got his first major role as Rusty. He'd go on to The Breakfast Club and Weird Science within 2 years. Dana Barron played Audrey. Randy Quaid showed up as Cousin Eddie, a character who would become legendary across the franchise. A young Jane Krakowski had a small role, years before 30 Rock or Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. And then there was Imogene Coca as Aunt Edna, and Eugene Levy in what amounts to about 3 minutes of screen time as the car salesman at Lou Glutz Motors. His line about the truckster became one of the most quoted of the decade. 3 minutes. That's all it took. The stunt work deserves its own chapter. The desert scene where Clark misses a highway exit and sends the truckster airborne off the end of a closed road was coordinated by Dick Zeiker. Zeiker also served as second unit director and was the type of man who viewed physics as a set of polite suggestions. During setup for the jump, crew members started placing bets on how far he could actually launch the station wagon. Someone drew a line in the sand at 50 feet. Zeiker sailed past it without effort. More lines were drawn. More money went down. The final measured distance was 173 feet. A 4,000-pound station wagon, airborne, covering 173 feet before slamming into the desert floor nose first. In the film, Rusty says to Clark, "Gee, Dad, you must have jumped this thing about 50 yards." The kid wasn't far off. The landing was hard enough that the front end crumpled significantly, which created a cascading production problem. Every truckster used in scenes filmed after the jump had to be carefully beaten up to match the damage from the landing. You can't have a pristine car in one scene and a smashed one in the next. Well, you can, but audiences notice. There were complications beyond the stunts. Hall grew 3 inches during the 55-day shoot. He's visibly different heights in different scenes if you're watching for it. Imogene Coca, who was 80 at the time, suffered what was believed to be a small stroke during production. She filmed a scene one morning, and by that afternoon couldn't remember any of it. She and her husband worked together to relearn her lines so she could return to set and finish the movie. She did. Nobody replaced her. The dog on the leash gag, one of the darker jokes in the film, was reportedly inspired by something the crew actually witnessed during the road trip shoot. They saw a real dog tied to a real bumper and the aftermath of someone driving away. Director Ramis confirmed this in the commentary track, though he noted they toned down the visuals significantly for the film. Hughes's original script included a bloody dog pelt attached to the leash and a long red streak on the road behind the car. Ramis cut both of those. The original ending was a disaster in test screenings. In Hughes's screenplay, Clark arrives at Wally World, finds it closed for repairs, completely snaps, and drives to the home of Roy Wally. It's the park's Walt Disney-like founder to take him hostage. He forces Wally and his executives to dance and sing mascot songs for the family. Test audiences hated it. They'd sat through 90 minutes waiting to see the park. The promise of Wally World was the engine driving the whole movie. Getting a hostage crisis instead of roller coasters felt like a betrayal. Ramis agreed completely. He had Hughes write a new ending where the Griswolds break into the closed park and ride the rides by themselves. They cast John Candy as Lasky, a security guard who confronts Clark with a BB gun and the weary resignation of a man who has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. Candy shot for maybe 2 days. The cast had to be reassembled months after principal photography wrapped. By then, Anthony Michael Hall had grown noticeably, which is visible in the Wally World footage if you look carefully. But it didn't matter. The new ending tested through the roof. The film opened July 29, 1983, 1,175 theaters, #1 opening weekend with over $8 million. It was also Christie Brinkley's acting debut, playing the mysterious blonde in a red Ferrari 308 GTS, who flirts silently with Clark at every highway stop and rest area along the route. Brinkley traveled with the crew for the entire shoot, despite having only a handful of scenes. She spent her downtime horseback riding and whitewater rafting. The film grossed $61.4 million against a $15 million budget, 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. It had outperformed sequels to both Jaws and Star Wars at the box office that summer. Warner Brothers sold the CBS television rights for $8.5 million. The theme song, Holiday Road, by Lindsey Buckingham of Fleetwood Mac, reached number 82 on the Billboard Hot 100. The film spawned 5 sequels over 3 decades. None matched the original. Now, about those station wagons. There's a theory that the truckster helped kill the American station wagon. The timing is worth noting. Chrysler launched the Dodge Caravan in '84, 1 year after vacation. Through the '80s, wagon sales cratered. Lee Iacocca pitched the minivan specifically as a wagon replacement for people who thought wagons were boring. Sliding doors, better fuel economy, more space, no stigma. By '91, the Country Squire was Ford's worst seller, fewer than 4,000 built. After 41 years, the line was dead. Did a movie kill the wagon? No. The oil crises started the bleeding. Regulations made big wagons expensive to build. The minivan was simply a better product. But the truckster didn't help. It took every negative association people already had with station wagons and made them the punchline of a 98-minute joke. Whether it accelerated the decline or just wrote the eulogy, the timing was brutal. None of the 5 originals survived. They were either destroyed during filming or converted back into standard LTDs for use as background cars in other productions. Gone. A supposed original sits in a car museum in Chicago. It's a replica. The mirrors are wrong. The wood grain doesn't match. The back was never finished. People take photos with it anyway. The replica market is where things get properly strange. In 2019, a reproduction built by Bandit Movie Cars in Palmetto, Florida, sold at Barrett-Jackson for $91,000. It had been built for Beverly D'Angelo, signed poster, handwritten letter. The shop owner had been introduced to D'Angelo by the late Burt Reynolds, because, of course, Burt Reynolds was involved. Another replica hit $100,000 the following year. $100,000 for a copy of a fictional car based on a real car that cost maybe $10,000 new. A family in Georgia named Griswold, Steve, and Lisa built their own truckster and drove it cross-country to the real Wally World. A teenager in Illinois built one for his senior project, a hand-fabricating 60 corner pieces for the wood trim and color-matching the paint from residue on an original crown emblem from the set. The truckster endures because of what it represents. The Country Squire was the car you rode in when you were 8, facing backward in the 3rd row, watching the road disappear behind you. It smelled like vinyl and old French fries and the quiet desperation of a father who was lost but wouldn't admit it. Nobody loved these wagons at the time. Everybody loves them now. The truckster took that memory, amplified every dorky, embarrassing, hopelessly uncool aspect of it, and turned it into something approaching art. It was ugly on purpose, ugly as a thesis statement. And Clark Griswold drove it anyway, because that's what dads do. They take what's available, load it up, and drive. So that's the Wagon Queen Family Truckster, a fictional car built from 5 real cars nobody wanted, painted a color that didn't exist, designed to be the worst vehicle ever committed to film. 4 decades later, it's more famous than the car it was based on, more valuable, more beloved than any wagon Ford ever sold. The ugliest car in movie history became the most iconic. Nobody saw that coming, except everyone. And there you have it. If you grew up riding backward in your parents' wagon, you already know why this car matters. Got a Country Squire story? A truckster sighting? Drop it in the comments. And if you made it this far, subscribe. We do this every week.